mixers. A lot of rethinking of to kind of our homes. Oh no, I think I reception orchestra. Green room or pre-room.
Be here and moment. I've been has really brought into in cities and by the places or don't this night art is celebrate about you know the our cities that use making sure music venues is involved in government for our own survival. So I'm really pleased to be moderating this panel, the subject of which is rethinking nightlife. But I should tell you the session description, which is that music is a part of nightlife, and nightlife industries are more than music. During the pandemic, nightlife was further challenged, including restaurants, hotels, bars, and other venues. For some cities, nightlife became daytime or just closed with curfew to unpermitted events. Where do we want to go for robust local nightlife? And for nightlife industries, what practical actions and strategies are needed and planned for recovery? So as I said, my name is Michael Fichman. I live in Philadelphia. I'm a longtime music producer and DJ. I'm also a professional city planner and a lecturer at the University of Pennsylvania's PennPrexis. And I am an effort called the Global Nighttime Recovery Plan, which is bringing together a lot of people and ideas and strategies for supporting nighttime arts and culture. And I'd like to ask each of my three colleagues here to introduce themselves in a sentence or two, starting with Mike Bell.
Thanks, Michael, and thanks, Gigi, and everyone at Amplify. My name is Mike Bell, and I am the co-founder of the new Colossus Festival. We are a showcase or internationally based showcase festival happening on the Lower East Side. Our last edition was the March of last year. We might be the last pre-COVID festival. And yeah, that's it.
Scott?
Awesome. Thanks, Michael and Gigi and Storm, and to everyone at Amplify for having us here. I'm Scott Plusquellec. I am the nightlife business advocate for the city of Seattle. I operate out of the Office of Economic Development, and I work to support and grow our nighttime economy here in Seattle and support our nightlife venues.
Tara?
Hey everyone, my name is Tara Duvivier. I am also a planner, like Michael. I work for the Pratt Center for Community Development, which is based in Brooklyn, New York, out of Pratt Institute. We work with community groups and provide technical assistance related to land use and other, so they can advocate for themselves. I also moonlight as a DJ, so that's how Michael and I ended up meeting in terms of just similarities. I didn't know that there are a few planner DJs out there. There are. I mean, there are, maybe I can count like on my hand. And I am also honored to have worked with Michael over this past year with the Global Nightlife Recovery Plan. I worked on Chapter 4 related to nightlife workers and the impact the pandemic has had on them over this past year.
So that is actually throw me an alley-oop here for the first topic of discussion, which I'd like to start with you, Tara, actually. So we've seen this broad impact of the pandemic on nightlife over the last year. To your mind, what has been, if you had to choose one thing, the single most profound effect of the pandemic on nightlife?
Ooh, one thing I would say for me, at least the most impressive thing that I think that I've seen, and I shouldn't be that impressed because I think part of what has grown nightlife over the decades has been this, people of different groups coming together and really having nightlife as a refuge for them in terms of just being able to go out, not be, assaulted or, just targeted for who they are and really finding like community in nightlife. But I was very impressed to see the level of community and how it stepped up even further over this past year. Definitely people helping one another, whether it be on a micro scale, just DJs, helping other local DJs that they may know, to larger like efforts such as the Global Nightlife Recovery Plan. New organizations have come up with, such as NEVA, and the in New York City, we have New York Nightlife United, which is another group that came up out of this. And then just like a lot, also people immediately kind of went to action as far as like trying to raise money, understanding that people's income was immediately wiped out. So just seeing the level of community and how that stepped up over the last year has been one of the most profound things that I've seen.
Yeah, I would second that. I mean, the degree that we all found common cause, especially for industries that people often think of as being kind of crabs in a barrel industries, people banding together was certainly nice to see. Scott, I was wondering if you could, especially in the light of what you do professionally, which I'm not entirely sure many people will know what a nightlife business advocate is, but from where you sit, what have you seen as being the most profound impact of the last year?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I guess to maybe simplify it, my role is part of you could call it one of the night mayors, the night managers that have sprung up around the world over the past couple of years. But I was thinking about this. There's a few things, but one is, with this trend of night managers, night mayors, there was a blossoming of an understanding that nightlife was an asset and not a liability, and that we needed it as an essential part of our economy and of our city's vitality and our just as a community. I think that the pandemic has accelerated that, right? We lost all these places, and we lost these communities, and we lost these places to gather, and all of a sudden it became extremely apparent how important they were, both to the economy and to our communities. So I think that has been a very great thing. Some of the losses that I'm concerned about are, the impacts on our workers. We have lifelong industry workers who had to look for other jobs, and maybe those jobs provide insurance for the first time in their lives, or a decent salary that is regular. So are we going to get those people back? We're going to see a lack of, and then also just the mental health toll on those folks who have been dealing with that. And then just to wrap up on that, the final thing is I totally agree with Tara about watching the community of the profession come together and help each other. I do feel like one of the things we have lost, though, is the greater sense of community, of being able to go out, to be with other people who aren't our immediate friends, to be able to see diversity and to experience that. And so I do worry that social media does not replicate the experience of being in a concert hall or in a venue and shoulder to shoulder with each other, and that aspect of community. And so that has been, I think, accelerated by this past year.
Tara, can I ask you perhaps to follow up on what Scott was talking about with workers, and also perhaps some of the mental health angle? The work that you and I did together on Global Nighttime Recovery Plan was very specifically focused on the plight of workers over the last year. And you came up with some future-oriented ideas in terms of picking some of the good strategies and solutions that communities and governments were trying to put forward. What were some of the things you identified in that process?
One of the things I think for us, even just trying to get the chapter together, was really with these types of reports, metrics always is important. It's always good to have, realizing that we didn't really have much to go on other than what we've seen on the ground as far as our colleagues, as far as ourselves, our friends, and really trying to figure out, well, how can we gather that data on a global scale? I mean, it wasn't the most technical thing in the world, but just being able to have a survey and implement a survey to get some data to help really develop, get an understanding of what's actually happening, because we are all so separate, was really important. And realizing that the importance of that moving forward, especially when it comes to wanting to work with governments and wanting to work with foundations or even just other businesses, to be able to demonstrate that there are some serious metrics around who's employed in the nightlife industry specifically, which isn't something that's currently recorded, at least in the United States, as far as census data and things of that sort. And I think that's something that's really important for us to really trying to get an understanding of the strength of nightlife. I mean, now we've seen it. I know that, Michael, you've done some of this work around really trying to quantify the economic importance and impact of nightlife within a city. And even having that information too, I think is important for people to be able to advocate. Definitely organizing as workers, potentially unionizing or creating a worker center in order to really, one of the things that we knew before the pandemic was that there was while there's a sense of community and people are able to really find folks that are like them in terms of, again, vulnerable groups who are targeted, being able to find community and family in nightlife, it still makes it was still a challenge for many people to be able to earn a living wage. And Scott mentioning this idea that some people may not come back because of that is definitely of concern, so having the ability to organize and really be able to advocate for living wages and other things that people need in order to thrive in life, I think is something that I would we also recommended should come out of this. It's just, I think the way it works, especially it's a very kind of hustle type environment, especially if you're somebody who's just starting out, as far as, you might just do a gig for not a lot of money, or you might do, the owner, he's going to do your trading. But that in the long run, keeping that environment where people really aren't able to, go past that and really earn a living wage doing this work is something that's a concern. So those are the two things. Getting some metrics. I know they're not sexy, but getting some metrics, but then also getting workers organized, I think are two things that definitely we need to push and move forward and as we start to rethink nightlife.
Yeah, I think those are great points. And I would say from my own experience, I'm a member of Philadelphia's Arts and Culture Task Force making recommendations to City Council. And it's there's opportunity meeting preparation is when things happen. So being out there in your community and trying to organize people and trying to measure what matters and trying to gather ideas from things like the Global Nighttime Recovery Plan and put tools in your toolkit so that you can approach politicians, with real solutions and approach them in numbers. So we've talked about the what's happened in the past year, and let's look forward to the next year, and then after that, look forward to beyond. So, Mike, you are in the live events industry, and you have been, trying to shift and adjust what you are doing and figure out what's next. What do you foresee is coming for you over the next year, and how are you trying to adjust?
Yeah, it's really hard. We took this year off because the spirit of the festival is very much about being live, being in person, being in the same room. And it just didn't feel right to do it digitally, although we do have a weekly digital program where we're introducing international and US bands to our community. But we have announced dates for next year. It's March 9th through 13th. But the biggest challenge is we don't really know what else to expect. I mean, are those venues still going to be there next year? Can international bands cross the border without any problems? I mean, what is the festival going to look like? I mean, is it going to be just a bunch of bands in New York and New Jersey? I mean, all that is just, it's kind of really hard to wrap my head around at this point. But that said, I'm still super optimistic. The vibes I'm getting from talking to the international music community is pretty good as well. So, I mean, fingers are still crossed, but March is looking good.
Yeah, I'd say that the amount of optimism, despite all of these things, I'm doing a research project right now with creative communities in the Middle East, in Iraq and Lebanon. In Lebanon, they had a currency crisis. They had an explosion that destroyed all these venues. And the level of optimism that people express is like something you can almost only expect from, the kind of dreamers who come into creative industries. Scott, what are the kinds of things that your stakeholders are struggling or opportunities they're seizing or things that they're trying to use to approach the next year?
Well, hopefully, knock on wood, everything goes well tomorrow when the Shuttered Venues Grant reopens. So that's something that we've all been waiting for. I think one thing that I not only for the next year, but actually to jump ahead and answer the further question, to Tara's point about the organizing and NEVA and the impacts of those, I think we're going to see a profound change to the industry in the fact that we are going to see a new political and activist force come out of these independent venues who have learned that collectively they are stronger together, and that organizations like NEVA, like the Washington Nightlife and Music Association here in Seattle, in Washington State, they're not going away. They have seen what they are capable of doing, and there are many other issues that they are recognizing need to be addressed within the industry itself that was, as you said, broken before we even got here. So I'm very excited about unleashing that potential. what that's going to look like and what that's going to allow. And I think it's going to transform our live music industry, because I think that's going to be a counterbalance to the large, like the large touring and booking groups and the people who sort of have a monopoly on the industry.
Yes,
I think we'll see that change.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm just thinking again, that was when you mentioned that they are going to go past that, the issues around all of these larger organizations like Ticketmaster, Live Nation, and, that being a challenge to a lot of independent venues as far as being able to compete with that. To see that the National Independent Venue Association, I realized for those who didn't know, we're like, if we get into acronyms, especially people who work in academics and government, we immediately go into the acronyms and sometimes we don't remember that people may not know them all. Like seeing them and definitely come together and get bills passed and within a year, of time, a year's worth of time. I think that's a huge win for them. I do think, they will continue going. The importance of these venues in our communities, just in the whole economy of nightlife, especially for me, I am, I DJ in New York City, and who books me? Independent venues. Like, that's really at the very, very base level of things. We need these venues, and being able to see that, them really realizing their power and growing that on a national scale is really great.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in and just say, like, beyond that too, I'd really like to see the cities get back into embracing the DIY scene. New York City, especially Brooklyn, had a super vibrant DIY venue scene. That's where I got my start. My partners and I, that's basically where we met. And they're gone. You can't do it. It's impossible. I mean, I love the independent venues, but the super baby bands, they also need somewhere to start that's not necessarily reliant on bar sales or ticket sales.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, that's going to be the future as well. We have all these new empty shop fronts, right? And so what do we put in there? How do cities activate those spaces? But also, how do we get away from the alcohol, like you said, Mike, the alcohol reliant aspect and expand opportunities for more access by youth to
lower rents.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really the issue, is that even, the DIY spaces came out of, they were in manufacturing areas, industrial areas. There's not a whole lot of manufacturing and industrial in New York. So these were, they're not going to, they can't basically, allow those spaces were able to slide in. But then when rezoning started to happen in New York and people started to realize the value of their property, it's like, okay, well, I'm going to go and drop, I'm going to get some investors. We're going to drop a few $1 million to do this. We're going to get the zoning on this plot of land changed, and we're kicking you all out. Or we're going, or it's cool. Like in the case of, 285 Kent.
Yeah.
Then now who occupies Advice, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's in New York, that's like infuriating to me, but I do think having lower rents, doing things to allow for those rents to remain stable. New York City, for some time, it's starting to the movement to commercialize rent stabilization has been growing quite a bit. They're trying to get something passed that will help, but I do think having a lower startup cost for young people, and so they're not so reliant on alcohol sales and really can grow a culture, grow a community, is really key.
I think another simultaneous thing that needs to happen, and this is what I like to call it, the effort to legalize music, is that music is limited to being in so few types of zoning and needs so many permits and clearances and all these other kinds of things to have the highest type of licensure, for many reasons, for safety reasons that are very good reasons. But you combine that with a very competitive real estate market, and people can't get into the market. And when people can't get into the market, generally speaking, there are many, many communities in Philadelphia who don't look at the management at venues and say, I see somebody who looks like me, who understands me, who wants to put my music on, who feels comfortable having my community in their venue. And they don't get their start in music because they have nowhere to go. Temporary licenses that are flexible, and you can do things in public spaces. And like Scott said, there's a lot of unused space right now, presents a great opportunity, maybe the opportunity of a lifetime, to reintegrate art and music into the city now that the deck is being totally reshuffled in terms of what is where.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. They're trying to start that in New York now, I think, like open culture. So at least like allowing cultural organizations and venues to do things out in the street. So, I mean, it'll happen. It's going to start up soon. So it'll be interesting to see, but definitely it would be great to be able to access those storefronts. I mean, some of which have been vacant even prior to the pandemic. So it's like, you know, at what point are you just going to allow these to remain closed? Like, can we think of some more creative ways to activate these spaces and provide opportunities for people to really, you know, create culture?
Yeah, we've been doing, we just started testing the waters on outdoor shows at 18th Ward in Bushwick. It seems to be going all right, but it's like super stripped down. The brewery is like, you know, being pretty cautious about sound levels and all that too. And I think that's another thing that just needs to be addressed is making music accessible, making it legal. Artists need to perform at least to their full capacity. If we're going to have it outside and not have neighbors upset about it.
Yeah.
And
All the time, which I hate.
And sort of going back to the idea of cities beginning the baby steps of understanding that nightlife and music is a asset. I hope, you know, we're seeing things like agent of change legislation that's appearing in different places to help with noise and to mitigate factors of new development coming in near established nightlife. And so I think I hope that, like right now, our planning department and our STI is looking at ways to make the permitting more nimble in some of these places and change of use be easier. It needs to be more nimble, but I think that again, this practice of it takes like something like this to get people to change their mindset and start doing that. And once they start doing it, they see that it's fairly easy. Like the sidewalk cafe stuff, that happened really fast. And for years, people said, "Oh, you can't do that." But then it became a necessity, and all of a sudden, everyone realized how quickly you could. So I think we'll see that in other areas.
Absolutely. I think if anything that we've learned from the last year is that everything that we thought was set in stone was actually open for some interpretation when the, you know, situation became fluid. So and hopefully that the attention to the music sector and music space in the city and that spirit of flexibility are two things that endure, because in every crisis an opportunity, I suppose. We're going to wrap up our panel here, but before we do, we will all give, well, first off, I want to thank Amplify, and I want to thank all of you panelists for being here. And it's really nice to see you all, and may one day we, you know, get together in person. I can't wait. We can put all of our contact information. If folks want to find you, we can have our moderators put that up in the chat. So those of you who have joined us for our panel can follow us in our musical and professional and social media things. Gigi says it's already there, so perfect. But yeah, you know, in sum, it has most certainly been a year for rethinking, because we've had a lot of time to sit on our own and think. So when we get back out there and we can spend time with each other, hopefully it is in a new and better world.
Yes, indeed. Awesome. Great job, you all. Wonderful panel. Very informative. It's so interesting to hear what's happening in each of your cities. And we have said the word rethink. Michael finished with the words rethink, and that's been our common theme. And our next panel will be about rethinking as well. So stay tuned. We'll be back in a couple of minutes. And we're off.